A police dog suddenly stops cold at a backpack in the middle of a crowded terminal. Security moves in. What they unzip sends the entire station into chaos. What was inside that left trained officers frozen in place? Here's the full story, but before we get into it, drop your favorite dog's name in the comments and hit that subscribe button. The early morning rush at Lincoln Cross Bus Terminal in New Mexico was like any other. Passengers dragging worn-out luggage, engines groaning under diesel breath, and the metallic voice of platform announcements echoing under the high concrete roof. Bus 204 was ready to depart for Denver. A few final passengers hurried aboard, some sipping coffee, others thumbing phones. Everything seemed routine, but Officer Rick Stanton knew better than to trust appearances. After nearly 15 years with the City Transit Division's K-9 unit, he understood that stillness could hide noise, and ordinary days could crumble into chaos in seconds. Beside him, Kilo, his veteran Belgian Malinois, sniffed around the rows of seated passengers. Kilo was a serious dog, lean, silent, trained in narcotics, explosives, and emotional cues. Rick trusted him more than most people. They were finishing a random security sweep, a procedure intensified recently after an uptick in stolen luggage and an unresolved incident involving a smuggled item on an interstate route. Kilo had been restless all morning, distracted, but nothing had triggered him. That was, until they neared the west end of the terminal, where Platform 6 stood empty, with only a few scattered bags unattended near the metal bench row. Kilo's pace suddenly slowed, then stopped. His ears twitched, his body stiffened. A quiet growl rumbled in his throat. Rick turned to see him staring intently at a gray hiking backpack slumped against a bench leg. Unremarkable. Zipped up, slightly scuffed, like dozens of others in the terminal, but Kilo refused to budge. His tail stopped wagging. His nose inched closer, inhaling deep. Then came the unmistakable cue. He sat down, eyes locked on the bag, shoulders squared, not moving, not barking, not nudging forward, a silent signal of absolute focus. Rick tightened the leash. "What is it, boy?" Still no bark, just stillness. But not the calm kind. This was trained intensity, alert behavior. Rick had seen this exact posture once before during a controlled explosives drill. Kilo had signaled the presence of a concealed device tucked under a vehicle bumper. That day, the unit detonated it safely in the test yard. Today wasn't a drill. Rick radioed in the situation immediately. "Dispatch, we have a possible alert. K-9 indicating on an unattended bag. Platform 6. Request immediate containment and support." Within minutes, yellow tape began stretching across the boarding lanes. Security personnel cleared bystanders with brisk, practiced efficiency. Travelers grumbled, but no one resisted. People had learned to respect a police dog's attention. Kilo remained locked in position beside the backpack, unwavering. Rick knelt beside him, whispering praise, but didn't touch the bag. Protocols were strict. No opening, no shifting. The bomb squad would handle the physical check. Until then, time thickened. Officer Dana Rodriguez, part of terminal surveillance, joined Rick at the perimeter. "You sure it's not drugs? Could be just a mule's stash." Rick shook his head. "Kilo's behavior is off. He's not pacing, not whining. This is deep alert. Not narcotics. He's picking up something different." Rodriguez glanced toward the monitors in her hand. No footage of anyone dropping it off. Cameras show it was already there before 4:50 a.m. Could have been placed overnight. That made Rick's gut twist. Overnight meant vulnerability. Vulnerability meant intent. But something else began to nag at him. Kilo's reaction was intense, yes, but odd. There was no aggression, no barking, no attempts to dig or bite into the bag, just fixated presence. Almost like protection, not fear. More units arrived. The bag was scanned remotely. No clear signs of wiring or device signatures. Bomb techs prepared their containment shell. Yet, as the robotic arm moved toward the backpack, Kilo growled low, then shifted, placing himself directly between the machine and the bag. It wasn't part of his training. Rick had never seen him behave like this. He pulled Kilo back gently, leashing him behind the security tape. "Easy, partner. Let them do their job." But Kilo's eyes stayed on the bag, wide, almost distressed. Rick's instinct started screaming. Something wasn't right, but he couldn't articulate it. There was no threat he could see, yet the tension hummed louder than ever. When the techs finally opened the backpack, they found no wires, no drugs, no documents. Instead, tucked inside the center compartment, wrapped in a woolen scarf, was something small, breathing, a baby, no older than 4 weeks. Swaddled tightly, face flushed, fists clenched. A hospital band still loosely attached to its wrist, marked with fading ink. No ID, no accompanying note, just silence. That was quickly broken by shocked gasps from officers and medics. Kilo's growls ceased. Chaos turned to urgency. EMTs rushed in. The baby was alive, barely, hypothermic, severely dehydrated, pulse weak, but stable for now. The medics could not explain how the child had survived the hours in the cold with only a thin wool scarf for warmth. They speculated that the padded contents in the bag and the tight wrapping created a makeshift insulation. Rick stared at the tiny form being wheeled away, and then turned to Kilo, who was now pacing in circles, nose low, agitated, but no longer alerting. His job was done, but Rick could tell he was not finished emotionally. This wasn't a bust. This wasn't routine. This was personal for the dog. Rodriguez returned, pale and shaking her head. Still no footage. Whoever placed the bag must have avoided all the angles. It's like they didn't want the baby to be found, but didn't want them to die either. Or, Rick added quietly, they wanted someone specific to find it. The thought was unsettling, too intentional. Yet somehow, it fit. News traveled quickly. By mid-morning, local reporters were sniffing around, and the terminal remained partially closed. Officers combed the area for any evidence. Shoe prints, DNA traces, witness statements. Nothing surfaced. Rick requested surveillance tapes from earlier days, hoping maybe the person who placed the bag had cased the area before. It was a stretch, but desperation often lit paths where reason did not. And then something peculiar emerged. A day-old clip showed a woman in a faded green hoodie sitting near Platform 6 at midnight. She rocked back and forth, holding something in her lap, blanketed, swaddled. A bag sat beside her. Her face never lifted toward the camera. The timestamp showed she stayed for nearly 40 minutes. Eventually she stood, placed the bag down, adjusted the scarf, and walked away, vanished. They had no facial ID, but one thing stood out. As she left, she looked directly at a K9 unit poster hanging by the stairwell. The poster had Rick and Kilo's image, part of a public safety campaign. She paused, looked, then disappeared. Rodriguez zoomed in on the paused frame. She knew. Rick sat in the kennel area later that day, brushing Kilo's fur slowly. The dog was uncharacteristically restless, not anxious, more unsettled, as if something about the day still lingered under his skin. Rick knew that feeling well. That twisting sense that something critical had passed through your hands, and you had yet to grasp its full weight. He whispered, "You did something big today, partner." Kilo leaned into his chest. The baby had been transferred to Memorial Hospital's NICU. Doctors said if another hour had passed, hypothermia might have won. Instead, the child had shown signs of recovery, feeding tube working, heart rate steadying. They had no name, no clue, no answers, just a dog who refused to leave a backpack and a miracle that no one could quantify. But Rick understood something deeper. Kilo hadn't just followed training. He had sensed vulnerability, life, maybe even intent. As if a part of him had known that bag was more than canvas and zippers. It was a cry, and he had answered. 2 days had passed since the discovery at Lincoln Cross bus terminal, but Rick had barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Kilo, frozen in front of the bag, jaw tense, eyes locked. The baby's faint cry had not left his ears. The image of the green-hooded woman burned deeper each time the surveillance video played. Memorial Hospital reported cautious optimism. The child was gaining strength, responding to light and sound. But the emotional weight of it all was beginning to grow heavier by the hour. No one had come forward. No parent, no relative, no note, no calls to the hotline. The story had hit local news, but despite all efforts, there was complete silence. For Rick, that silence felt loaded. It wasn't neglect, it was intention. Someone left that baby with a purpose, and Kilo was somehow part of that purpose. That morning, Rick returned to the bus terminal, not as part of his patrol, but to examine the footage again, this time with fresh eyes and a sharpened gut instinct. Rodriguez had gone over it all multiple times, but now together, they slowed the recording. They watched the woman in the hoodie again, something about the way she moved, deliberate, cautious. She never looked directly into any camera except once, at the poster of Rick and Kilo. She had passed multiple benches, multiple trash cans, and abandoned carts. But she chose the exact spot under the terminal surveillance blind spot, except the camera on the roof corner caught her reflection off the bus windshield across from her. It was distorted, unclear. But Rick noticed something small. As she placed the backpack down, she whispered something. Her lips moved, and then she kissed the scarf before wrapping it tighter around the baby. Rodriguez leaned closer. That's not someone who wanted to dump the kid. Rick nodded. No, that's someone trying to save them. They replayed the clip again. Rick noticed her left wrist bare but faint traces of discoloration around it, like she had recently removed a hospital band or a restraint. That detail unraveled a new thread. Rick drove to the nearest women's shelter that afternoon, Safe Horizons, tucked near the edge of Albuquerque. It was a quiet, fortified place, mostly off public records to protect the identities of the women staying there. He showed his badge, gently explained his visit, and asked if a young woman, possibly early 20s, thin, wearing a green hoodie, had passed through recently. The director, Marlene, paused, then slowly nodded. We had someone who fits that. Came in 6 weeks ago, scared, didn't speak much, gave a false name, said she had nowhere to go, then left without notice 4 nights ago. Staff said she seemed distant, quiet, like she was already planning something. Rick showed her the paused video frame. Marlene didn't confirm. Confidentiality ran deep, but her eyes said enough. Was she pregnant when she arrived? Yes. Looked like she was due soon. Did she say anything strange? Marlene hesitated. Only that she didn't trust anyone anymore, except animals. Said dogs don't lie. Rodriguez pulled hospital records. No missing babies, but one name popped. A 23-year-old woman admitted to the ER 7 weeks ago with bruises and signs of domestic assault. No ID, no insurance. Treated, stabilized, then vanished after 2 nights. First name given, Alana. No last name. The date of release matched the timeline at the shelter. Rick dug deeper and reached out to old case files, past reports of domestic violence involving pregnant women who disappeared. One file from Colorado Springs stood out. A missing persons report closed without resolution. A woman named Alana Groves had fled a known offender 6 months earlier. No one had heard from her since. Piecing it together felt like chasing fog. No solid evidence, but the puzzle was forming. A woman on the run, a baby born alone, a backpack left intentionally in the path of the only creature she believed would not overlook it, a dog. Back at the unit facility, Kilo was restless again. He wouldn't sleep in his usual spot, wouldn't eat as much. He kept pacing by the door. Rick noticed he would sit by the back fence, gazing toward the terminal, nose twitching, as if he expected something or someone. Dogs didn't understand news headlines, but they understood memory and scent and absence. Rick decided to take him to Memorial Hospital. The nurses in the NICU hesitated at first, but then Kilo approached the sealed window quietly, head tilted, posture calm. Inside, the baby lay bundled in new blankets, IV tubes and monitors surrounding him. Kilo's nose brushed the glass softly. Then he sat. Rick stood behind him, watching. A nurse beside him whispered, "He's been fussy all day. Nothing calms him, but look, he's still now." The baby had turned his head slightly, eyes fluttering, hands unclenched. No words, no explanations, but something passed between the two. A recognition, perhaps. A sense that the warmth, the safety, had followed him here. And Rick knew. The baby remembered the scent, not the mother's. The dog's. With the image from the footage now broadcast on every channel, tips began to surface. Most were dead ends, but one call came from a night janitor at an abandoned diner along the state highway between Albuquerque and Santa Fe. He claimed he'd seen a young woman in a green hoodie sheltering there 2 nights in a row. She barely spoke, kept to herself, and left just before dawn. When officers arrived, they found remnants. A disposable water bottle, a half-eaten protein bar, and a hospital wristband buried beneath a loose floor tile. Name faint but legible, Alana. No footprints led away. But the land was flat and vast. There were too many directions to go. Rick asked for thermal drone scans, for patrols along truck stops, local shelters, known vagrant routes. Nothing turned up. The trail had gone cold again, yet Kilo remained fixated. Every morning when they passed Platform 6, he paused, looked, sat down, and waited. The media painted the event as a miracle. Guardian dog saves abandoned baby. They ran Kilo's photo next to the child's. Donations flooded the hospital. Offers to adopt the baby poured in. But Rick pushed for patience. He didn't believe this was abandonment. This was a plea for protection, and the mother was still out there, possibly watching from somewhere, scared, unsure whether her child was safe or stolen. Then came the message. An anonymous letter delivered to the precinct. Handwritten, shaky, no envelope, just folded. He was never meant to suffer. I just could not keep running. I thought maybe the dog would know that he would not walk past him. I remembered his face. I saw it on the wall. I knew he would stop. I had no one else to trust. Please don't let him forget me. I had to protect him in the only way I could. Tell the dog thank you. No name, no contact. But Rick held it with a weight he couldn't shake. This was not a criminal mind. This was a broken one. A mother who had given her child the only protection she believed still existed. A stranger's dog. Kilo. Rick stood by Platform 6 that night, long after the crowds had gone. Kilo sat beside him, silent. The sky above the station turned deep blue, then black. He remembered all the cases over the years, drugs, weapons, crime, but this was different. This wasn't a bust. It was a bridge between two beings who couldn't speak but understood more than words. And somewhere out there, a mother waited. Heart-torn, probably still hiding. Maybe watching the news. Maybe unsure whether she would ever be able to hold her child again. Rick didn't know how this story would end, but he did know this. The bond between a human and a dog had saved a life. And if anything could finish what had started on that cold bench under a flickering platform light, it would be that same bond. The baby was given a temporary name, Micah. Nurses called him that when they fed him, comforted him, or documented his progress. But to Rick and Kilo, he had no name, only a story that was not yet finished. As Micah grew stronger in the hospital, so did the city's attention. The media loved the narrative, abandoned baby, heroic police dog, mystery mother. But for Rick, the situation remained deeply unsettled. There was no resolution, only the hollow sound of unanswered questions and the quiet, steady wait for something more. And as for Kilo, he became famous overnight. Children drew pictures of him. News anchors praised him, yet none of that mattered to him. He kept sniffing every stranger at the terminal, kept checking Platform 6, kept looking for a scent he could never quite find again. 2 weeks passed with no updates. Then one morning, another letter arrived at the precinct. No envelope, same handwriting. Just a folded paper placed at the front desk during the early hours. No cameras had captured who left it. You gave him a name. That means you think he is real. Thank you. But you should not name him until I tell you who he is. I was born in Cedar Hollow, raised wrong, hurt too young. I ran for years. He came from love, but I could not give him what he deserved, so I gave him to someone who would see him, A dog is the only one I could trust not to judge me. I saw your partner's eyes that day. I knew he would not leave the bag. There was one more line barely legible. If you believe he deserves the truth, follow the scarlet ribbons. It felt cryptic, deliberately so, but also familiar. Rick remembered something. When reviewing the terminal footage in the past, he had dismissed a small visual detail as random. The green-hooded woman had tied a piece of red ribbon to the backpack zipper, just a small loop. Nothing unusual, until now. Rick returned to the terminal with Kilo, scanning every inch of Platform 6. Nothing. But just across the tracks, tied loosely to the chain-link fence surrounding the service area, was a faded red ribbon. Kilo pulled toward it. They followed the fence line until they reached another ribbon, this time tied to a rusted bike rack. Rick turned slowly, noting that it pointed toward the side alley that bordered the loading zone for inner-city buses. Another ribbon, then another, each one subtle, easy to overlook, but not for someone trained to see trails, not for a dog who could smell grief in motion. The trail led past the terminal, across a fenced vacant lot, and ended at the back of an old shuttered community center. There was no one in sight, but on the ground beside the emergency exit door sat a folded blanket, the same pattern that had been wrapped around Micah, and underneath it, a laminated card from Memorial Hospital. Rick picked it up, on the back in smeared ink. You found me once. I needed to see if you still would. The community center had been locked up for years, used only for storage by the city, but Rick requested immediate clearance to enter. No signs of forced entry, no alarms. The air inside was dry and still, rows of folding chairs, stacked gym mats, boxes of donation clothes. Rick and Kilo moved slowly through the dim corridors, and then Kilo stopped. He turned left at the hallway near the back storage room, nose lifted, body tense. Rick followed. There in the corner, huddled beneath a patchwork of old coats and blankets, was a figure, frail, motionless, barely breathing. The woman looked up slowly. It was her, Alana. Her eyes were hollow, her face gaunt, but she did not flinch. She only looked at Kilo and softly nodded as if she had been waiting for him specifically. She whispered something Rick could barely hear. I knew he would find me. Kilo inched forward, sat quietly, and laid his head gently in her lap. Alana was taken to the hospital immediately. She had not eaten in days. Her body was dehydrated, her mind fragile. But as she recovered, the story emerged, slowly, painfully. She had fled Colorado after a violent partner threatened her life and her unborn child. She changed states, names, and shelters. But no matter where she went, she feared she was being watched. She suffered from untreated PTSD, sleep deprivation, and trauma-induced paranoia. When she gave birth alone in a motel outside Albuquerque, she did not go to the police. She believed no one would believe her, but when the infant developed a fever and she realized she was out of time, she made a choice, not to abandon but to entrust. She had passed Lincoln Cross Terminal once before, weeks earlier. She remembered seeing a wall poster of a dog and officer duo with the slogan, "They never miss what matters." She remembered the dog's eyes, so she returned, carried her baby in a backpack, waited until the bench near Platform 6 was empty, then left him hoping, praying, trusting the only being she still believed in. Not the public, not the system, but a dog. Legally, it was a gray area. There were questions. Why hadn't she sought help? Why hadn't she left a note? Why risk exposure? But psychologists confirmed what Rick already suspected. She had not acted with malice. She had acted from trauma. Her mind had fractured, but her instincts to protect remained intact. No charges were filed. She was placed in a supervised recovery facility specializing in postnatal mental health care. Slowly, through months of support, counseling, and treatment, Alana began to heal, and eventually she was allowed supervised visits with Micah, whose real name, she revealed, was Elijah. He responded to her voice like he had never been apart. 6 months later, Rick stood once again at Platform 6, this time not on patrol, but waiting. A woman stepped off a shuttle with a small boy in her arms, strong, smiling, eyes bright. Alana walked beside him, hand in hand. They met Rick and Kilo at the same bench. Kilo's tail wagged, slow and calm. Elijah giggled, arms reaching toward him. There was no tension now, no cold benches or mysterious backpacks, just a mother, her child, and the dog who had kept them from falling apart. Rick watched quietly. No medals could capture what Kilo had done. No headline could explain how a trained K9 meant to sniff out danger had instead sniffed out heartbreak and led them back to wholeness. Alana knelt beside Kilo. She whispered again, "You never forgot him, did you?" Kilo simply laid his head in her lap, same as the day he found her. The city moved on. New cases arrived. New alerts rang out. But at the heart of Lincoln Cross Terminal, there now hung a framed photo on the wall, a quiet memorial to a moment that almost passed unnoticed. Here, where a dog did not move, a life was saved. Not by force, not by law, but by loyalty. Rick often paused by it on late nights, and each time he did, Kilo sat beside him, silent, still, remembering. If that story pulled at your heart the way it did ours, imagine what's coming next. We share true emotional stories that connect people and animals in the most unexpected ways, so don't miss out. Hit subscribe and like the video so you're here for the next one. You won't want to miss what happens next time.